Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for coming today. My name is Max Fraser. I'm the editorial director of Dezeen, and this is the third and final Dezeen talk that we're staging in this room during Clerkenwell Design Week. These talks have been staged in partnership with Villeroy Boch and Ideal Standard. I just wanted to quickly tell you a bit about the partnership that we've been running with them this week. So earlier this year, we staged a competition on Dezeen called Shaping Water. And we invited ideas for a large-scale installation that celebrates the essence of water. If you haven't seen it already, I encourage you to go and see the winning design, which is up the road at St. John's Gate, which is a wonderful historic landmark in the heart of Clerkenwell. In this talk, we're going to hear from three wonderful individuals next to me here who are leading the wellness charge in the public and private domains, using design as a tool with which to drive calm, healing and uplifting spaces. So let me just introduce our panel. On the far side, we have Simon Kincaid, a partner at Conran & Partners, based here in Clerkenwell. To my left, we have Robin Landau, who's the founder of Kinda Studios, also based here in London, and Sunny Velikova in the middle there, the founder of Nora Wellbeing, also based here in London. Please welcome the three speakers. Now, in order to kick this off, I've just given you the names and their job titles, but I wanted each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you do. I've also asked you to present just a few projects that maybe lean into this topic of wellness and well-being. We're going to kick off with Simon. Welcome, Simon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the intro. This is super space to be in and great to be on this panel. I feel like I'm the least intellectual out of everybody, but hopefully I can bring some creative input. And in our business, we're mixing creative and commercial all the time. So we're interior designers. We've got a studio here in London and in Hong Kong. And we kind of design spaces as a sequence of experiences. And the idea of home, workplace, and hospitality are all different typologies that we work on. And I think we're naturally blending those all together anyway. I think it feels a bit boring saying that because we just do it naturally, okay, but the old irony that the kind of hotel inspires the residents and now the residence inspires the hotel, and all this crossover is what we're doing on a daily basis. And two or three projects here. This is a residential project or a build-to-rent project, so this houses 200 plus residents in King's Cross. This idea of shared living was about a sequence of spaces that can give people an emotional connection and a respite from their home or from their work. And the purpose is that all different spaces feel a little bit different. So if the gym is in the middle, it's a kind of an intense bit of escapism, where the top right is the kind of subdued idea of a little bit of work from home. And also we're working in the hospitality sector with some big brands. This is for Hyatt. The idea of wellness, tranquility, calm materials, is how that manifests itself in that culture and that region. And the third one is our studio. So it's absolutely kind of back to reality, but the idea of different spaces and a tranquil palette that we are being our creative and commercial selves in, which is just around the corner. And there's an installation that we've collaborated with a lighting consultant if you'd like to go and visit. So this was a retail space for the brand Kef, which is a speaker brand, but didn't want it to feel like a shop. So it feels like a cafe, it feels like a cinema, and this idea of kind of like different experiences through the retail experience. Thank you.
There's a few words you mentioned there around materials, the material palette, around light and sound, and we're going to pick up on some of those things as this conversation evolves. But next we're going to hand over to Robin, who's going to tell us a bit about what she does.
Thanks, Max. My name's Robin Landau, and I'm one of the co-founders and directors of Kinda. We're a neuroscience studio and lab, and we specialize in translating the latest neuroscience research into how we respond to art, culture, environments, design, spaces, into applied modes for creative projects. It's worth mentioning that our work really spans loads of different areas, and the work I'm presenting today is a lot of installation-based work, but we do a lot of stuff kind of on location. Some of the work that we do, unfortunately, we can't disclose publicly, and some of it is launching in a little bit, like a 3 days of design next month. But what you're seeing here is a growing orb, and this is part of a new installation we launched literally just yesterday and last night at the Barbican Centre, as related to a exhibition called Feel the Sound. And so the intention of this work is to help people understand how their bodies are responding to the spaces around them. And so what you're seeing here is simply just a visualization, but effectively how it works is people place their hand on a sensor, it starts to read their physiological signals like their heart rate variability, and turns those signals into different shapes of the orb. So these inputs govern speed, color, as well as shape. And the intention is for people to start understanding how their embodied responses are shaped by the environments around them, which is a really big part of our work to help people raise awareness about these things and design more intentionally as well. This is a different piece of work that we created in-house at the studio as well, called Inspirit. Inspirit is an audio-visual experience that's designed to help people entrain their breathing to the rhythm of the artwork. And so it uses kind of spatial and binaural audio as well as immersive visuals to help guide the person into syncing their breathing with this piece of work, and to say, how do you actually take these well-being experiences and do them a little bit differently by combining it with art and the science. So this is launching actually in a couple of weeks in New York, but the intention of this is to be within hospitality environments, within lobbies, within in-flight entertainment. The possibilities are really endless as a digital tool, and it's something that you can use as an individual level, but also on a collective level to synchronize people's breathing and breed a sense of community within spaces as well. And then this last image I have on screen is another piece of work called Synchronies, which was launched in Barcelona a couple of years ago, funded by the British Council. And it effectively was a 20-minute audio experience that took people through nature sounds all the way through man-made noise pollution and into healing sounds. And the 20-minute piece just encouraged people to listen. We also clipped people into heartbeat sensors to track their heartbeat response. And we measured people's heartbeats over the course of the experience. What we found is that over the 20 minutes, people generally had a more relaxing impact. Their heart rate started to slow down, but we also measured the synchronization of people within the audience as well. And we saw that when nature sounds were played, people's heartbeats were most synchronized. And when Anthropocene noise pollution was played, people were least synchronized. And very excitingly, I have my phone out because last night I got an email to say that Synchronies was selected to be featured as a case study in an upcoming policy brief developed by the World Health Organization to explore how arts can address the health impacts of climate change, including artistic projects that address greenhouse mitigation and climate issues. And so one of the goals is to really think about how these works of art can not only help the way people feel on this individual level, but how you can use design and art and technologies to ladder up into policy changes to help kind of this trickle-down approach about the impact that these things can have on people's well-being. Thanks.
Congratulations. That's a great email to receive.
Yeah, I had to pull up my phone because it hasn't quite sunk into my mind yet about what it really is.
Affecting policy. Brilliant. You pick up on some things that you've said that we will also pick up later on, particularly around the kind of neuroscience and the research that you're doing in that area. But before we talk about that, let's also now hear from
Hello,
Sunny.
everyone.
Welcome, Sunny.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sunny Velikova, and I'm the founder of NeuroWell. I'm actually going to come from a little bit of a different perspective today. I'm going to talk about workplace and perhaps beyond, and talk about our industry as designers and architects. I'm going to start by sharing a little bit about my journey. I hope I'm not too long. I'm going to try and speed it up. I was a designer at Perkins & Rowe and Gensler. Well, first Gensler and then Perkins & Rowe. And I used to focus first on education and then moved to specialize in workplace design. And we focused on projects in the finance sector, so banking, investment banking, big law firms as well. And what I noticed is that all our clients were working in a very high pressure environment, a lot of stress, long hours. And over time, over a number of projects, our clients started realizing that people's productivity and direct business growth is linked to their employees' well-being. So with that in mind, I started wondering, what are we doing for our colleagues? What are we doing for designers and architects to do more? Our clients were coming with entire teams on workplace experience and well-being, massive briefs created just for the employee. And at the time, I decided to join the Perkins & Rowe Mental Health and Wellbeing Group, where we were supporting our staff alongside HR, introducing new policy within the company, and I got really passionate about this. And that was actually only a year ago I left Perkins & Rowe, so it's a very recent journey for me. I left Perkins & Rowe and I trained as a corporate wellness specialist, and I founded NeuroWell, where we dedicated to support teams and organizations in supporting employee well-being within their workplace, within their culture and environments. And with that, I just wanted to share that well-being in Norwell, we believe that well-being is the foundation for creativity, productivity, and innovation. If we think about stress, it's actually releasing cortisol in our bodies. It affects our prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for complex thinking. It's the area responsible for decision making and creativity. So we can be stressed all the time and be creative. And if we think about productivity, then the biggest obstacle to productivity is burnout and stress. And if we want sustained productivity, we would need to sustain our well-being long term. And innovation also thrives on well-being because of our social well-being and because we need psychological safety to be able to share our ideas and collaborate with others. We need to feel safe to be able to share new ideas that are perhaps different and be accepted and valued within our workplace. And that just brings me to the question, as industry, are we doing enough to support our well-being, to be as creative, innovative and productive as we can, because these are vital aspects of our industry. Actually, in Bulgaria, we have a saying, I'm Bulgarian, so back home we say the shoemaker always walks barefoot. And the reason behind this is because we tend to focus so much on delivering excellent work for our clients that we tend to neglect ourselves. So as an industry, we are in a very unique position to really change the culture of work. And I think as an industry, we need to look after ourselves first to be able to provide that for our clients. We need to understand what well-being means. We need to live it, not just for ourselves personally, but also as a company, as a team, experience what that means on an organizational level, and then we can support our clients with their own well-being and their team's well-being. We have a great opportunity in front of us because we are positioned so closely related to other industries that we can influence the culture of work. And in the UK, we're actually facing a productivity crisis, and I don't believe it's about the hours work, because we all work really long hours. And I think we have absolutely amazing, talented people, so it's not the skill set, but I think it's about being in a place where we need a sort of big change, a revolution, if you want, about supporting employee well-being. So people can grow, they can be supported to grow their skill set, be aligned with their purpose at work, and give their 100%. And businesses that invest in well-being actually better than their competitors. They outperform their competitors in innovation, in resilience, and staff engagement, attraction of talent, and also retention of talent. And the images you've seen from the past few slides are actually from some of the designers' retreats we're hosting here in Clerkenwell. So we have designers come in for a day of well-being. We look after their physical well-being, but we also discuss topics like mental health and stress, and how can we be more supportive to our colleagues, and how can we lead that change. Thank you for having me, and I'm really excited for this conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Sunny. No doubt you'll be getting a phone call or an email from somebody in policy-making circles pretty soon. I mean, just the other day I read about this productivity crisis that the government, I think, is well aware of and not quite sure how to tackle. Maybe you know something more about that, and maybe why it's happened. Why is this suddenly a crisis?
I think it's actually been growing since the financial crisis. It's always been there. We're not doing as well as other leading economies. I'm not sure exactly what are the reasons behind it. I'm not an economist, but I definitely can see that companies individually can look at their well-being. They can assess what's happening within their company, and then implement new strategies and new ways of working that supports their people long-term, without burnout, with more growth and more I suppose, support, for them.
And it's interesting that you pick up on, designers creating spaces for other clients' well-being without really taking care of their own well-being. And we'll pick up on that in a moment. I think that's an interesting point. Just as we link wellness to the design industry specifically, though, forgive me if I'm wrong, but surely well-being and wellness should be embedded in the brief when you're designing any space for other humans. So why do you think it's become such a heightened topic in recent years? I go to a lot of design weeks. I can't seem to move around a design week anymore without some sort of immersive sensory experience that I'm embedded in all of a sudden to get me away from the madness of the world outside. I mean, is it a reaction, do you think, to something broader going on in society at the moment? I mean, this is one for any of you, but...
I mean, I can start,
yeah,
maybe.
Go for it.
I think you mentioned that earlier. I think it's probably started with the pandemic, but also I think we have so much access to information. So there is a bit of a digital overload, but also the access to information gives us more access to things like understanding what mental health and well-being means. And also I think a lot of research recently showing that, I mean, sorry, I keep on going about the workplace because we have Simon here talking about hospitality. But when it comes to workplace, actually businesses that support employee well-being see growth long-term. They're performing way, way better than their competitors. So I think that's picked up by employers, and then people can see it and keep on sharing that.
Well, the idea of having too much data is like people have got their whoops telling them they didn't have quite the right amount of sleep. It's paranoia. I think I'd want to throw that away because I think, no, I'm not having enough sleep. I'm not doing that kind of sleep. The work we're doing is often with very sophisticated clients in a typology, and they're looking to us to help them write the brief. They're not coming to us and saying, I want it to be stronger in wellness. I want everyone to feel more well. I think they're writing in a different way, and we're having to read between the lines and rewrite it back to them. So say, oh, you want it to feel more comfortable. You want it to physically be more comfortable to people so that they're more active, they're less stressed. And then it's actually emotionally, they're more well because of the atmosphere that you're creating as well. So you can affect people's emotions through the physical. So we're doing that as environmental designers. And what we're kind of coming back to in the briefs is that sometimes the blur of typologies is helpful. So in the workplace, it might not be as explicit as someone saying, I want it to feel more residential. They might say that, I want it to feel more homely. But that home is different for everybody in different cultures, in different stages of your life. So what they're really meaning is they want it to feel more comfortable. And the lighting is lower, the lighting is warmer. It's more soft for me to sit in a lounge environment. I feel more relaxed. And it's a little bit the same with the hospitality edge, is that you're bringing this idea of hotel design into a workplace. But a hotel, there's so many different brands. It could be a Citizen M, a Hoxton, it could be a Six Senses or a Park Hyatt, it could be, what the hell is a hotel? That's a big question, what is a hotel? But what they're meaning is high quality service and this idea of a community. So you can be well, but a hotel is a very sophisticated machine of hundreds of people creating a community every day. And that's been carefully thought through and programmed to manifest itself, to make people feel relaxed, comfortable, at ease. So you're changing the temperature of the lighting, the levels of the lighting, the acoustics, the air quality. So these things are happening through the design, through the client's brief that we're then interpreting and adding this layer of wellness through borrowing from other typologies, I think.
Interesting. Robin, you're responsible for a lot of the for a lot of these sort of sensory experiences. I mean, this exhibition you mentioned that opened yesterday at the Barbican, which I had the pleasure of having a tour from you, was an expression of that. One of the things you mentioned in your presentation was, you're fascinated with monitoring how people are responding to situations and have the tools to do that. What's been some of your insights as to this kind of new movement?
I think that ultimately people are more aware of how they're feeling than ever before. We mentioned the pandemic and also just the challenging nature of kind of the world at large as it presents itself. And so I think people are demanding different spaces and are hopefully more aware of how they feel in spaces. And I think that the work that we're doing is to help people raise awareness about how they feel within different environments so that they can go to a workplace or go to a hotel or even their own home and understand the sensory ingredients within their space that will allow them to feel well. And unfortunately, I think that a lot of us are still disconnected. We're still disconnected from how we feel because when the world gets challenging, our inbuilt mechanism is to kind of switch off, right? We do it unconsciously, but we reach for our phone, a glass of wine, the fridge, whatever it is. There's endless vices to choose from. And what we can do is if if we encourage people really back into the body, then we get people to really understand how they're feeling within certain environments, and then can design their own environments as well to support that. And I think what's rising is the demand for these spaces, because people want to go on holiday differently, right? You don't necessarily want to go on holiday and do the same things you did before. Luxury for people now ultimately means a sense of presence, leaving feeling better than when you first began. And so the experiences that people are looking for are different. And you mentioned going to design weeks and having all these different kind of immersive sensory experiences. And of course, I think those are great. I'd love to design more. We do design some of them, as you've seen. But I think that there's still a little bit of a disconnect between those installations and activations that you see and it happening in the real world architectural landscapes in the built environment long term. I think that, just like anything, the progression to these things is obviously slow, and you have to start somewhere. You can't expect people to completely redesign a space or have the financial means to do so immediately. But I think it's great to hear that you're working with your clients in the hospitality industry in briefs from the beginning. I think that when it comes to the measures, listen, we don't want to measure every single thing. It takes away from the experience itself. But how can we also start to really get a deeper understanding of how these spaces are helping make people feel? The work that we do is this work called neuroaesthetics, the neuroscience of our aesthetic experiences. And what it shows is that whether we're conscious of it or not, our brains and our bodies are constantly responding to the world around us, to the environments, to all of the different sensory aspects at play. And what if we could help prove, validate, and measure the impact that those spaces play on our health, so that the way people care for themselves can be different? How can visiting a building or an institution or, any sort of center or any sort of place that has public space or private space be a new model of care about how people can care for themselves? Because a lot of the models of care we have at the moment are broken. And so instead of these things being a nice to have, how do you make them essential? And how do you, in the briefs, you're talking about how do you make these ingredients essential at play, as opposed to just designing, for example, for the visual? Centering the body as part of the experience is really essential in the process.
Yeah, the neuroscience is fascinating, and that's a growing area as well. Being able to monitor the body in the way that we can with all of these sensors and things informs so much, I think, that could really aid the design industry. I don't know, Simon, I imagine a lot of the work that you're doing in your studio is led by a very strong design team, but a sort of inherent intuition as to what people are going to respond well to in certain spaces. Do you do any work with the kind of science side of things? And maybe we could encourage that today.
That's a good question, because in a workplace project, there'll often be some specialists involved as well. So there'll be some workplace strategists involved who are doing various studies on the condition of the current client's workplace and whether that is got some faults. Where is it unwell? So there might be some problems in there that need solving. So I think the idea of how the art and science blends there, we're on the edge of it, and it's not going as deep yet as that. But I think there must be a lot of clients who are willing to invest in that layer of it too. Actually, because with those strategists, what they're doing is they're getting data to prove why it's worth making certain investment points as well. So subject to the client's intent, they can then get the backup to do that.
I had a really strange experience in Japan. I stayed in a capsule hotel not so long ago, which is something I've always wanted to do. It was in the airport. I had an early flight, so it was very convenient. And when I checked in, they said, would you like a report on how well you sleep? And I thought, sure. And it was an extra $5 or something. And I was lying in this funny capsule-y thing and sleeping probably quite badly because I had the anxiety of waking up early for my flight. And sure enough, I did sleep badly. But what it had in this capsule, which I'm not sure I love particularly, but it had sensors all over the place that were reading my body movements, probably maybe my temperature, possibly my breathing rates, my heart rate, all those kind of things. And I thought that was kind of fascinating. I was also a little bit upset that maybe I was just another data point, but I wondered... Well, I'm sort of stating that as a project, but that the findings from that kind of thing could be really interesting to share more broadly as to what sensory stimulation might change. And
I wonder if anyone slept well there, if you're sleeping in a capsule.
Yeah. It's a strange thing. I would recommend you all try it at some point if you haven't. It's only like 30 quid for the night. It's pretty good value.
But there are lots of hotel rooms that have taken influence from the kind of spa culture for that reason, or from the residential typology, again, for that reason, of natural materials, neutral colours, soft finishes, great acoustics. It's probably better than the capsule experience.
I think that there are more things like that coming out because people want to learn more about themselves, right? People are more aware of themselves than ever before. Now, from a neuroscience perspective, we know more about the brain and body than ever before. The more aware we are individually within how we feel in spaces, the more we talk about it with others, the more we influence the way other people are also being aware of these sorts of things. I think, for example, like perhaps some people in this room know about the Thomas Heatherwick Humanize campaign, where he's really trying to call attention to the role that buildings have on our health. And I think that he's doing really great work. You know, they've just done this study with a researcher in Toronto where they had individuals look at a number of buildings in Toronto and the number of buildings in London. And what they found ultimately was that complex buildings that fascinated people and captured their attention had, you know, interesting intersections and curvature versus, you know, different forms, made people's arousal in their bodies spike higher. And those are the ones that were associated with greater liking. And so there's a sense of proving and calling attention to it. But I think the interesting thing that his team are doing is that they're trying to really influence the public understanding of these things. And I think if you create the groundswell from the bottom, you then increase the demand from the public to create spaces like these. And so when people are more aware of how their senses are experiencing, or maybe you're upset you didn't sleep well, some of it isn't always the information you want to hear. I think ultimately that's a benefit. But from a design perspective, it's really about how you use these things. You obviously don't want to bombard people with too much stimuli or too much information. You don't want too much data. You don't want to trust with data. Ethics is obviously something that you mentioned in terms of becoming a data point.
I should counter what I said by saying I also had the good fortune of staying in a hotel that prides itself on sleep as their thing. And I had a pillow menu and I could choose from one of 30 pillows. Did you
get a taste test of them? Could you
Which one did you choose?
Sampling?
I don't know. I think I was sort of very much under pressure to choose. So I kind of went, and there was a buckwheat pillow, which is terrible. It was called Crunchy, and I was like immediately called down to reception for a different one. But I slept really badly that night, really, really badly. And that was an extraordinarily expensive hotel. So
having access to that choice is quite a luxury.
Yes.
And you will have spoken about it afterwards to people and maybe never had that opportunity again. Yeah. So there's a perception of wellness in luxury. There is a value attached to it in fresh air, access to daylight even. So then you can dig deeper into that. And in our culture now is that we know that high quality natural foods can be more expensive than processed foods. There's an understanding that this purity and high quality in natural materials or consumables is expensive. So it becomes something that people are striving to find. So then if you're pulling it into design, people know there is a value attached to it, both a positive value for your well-being, but a commercial value.
Yeah, I think I was so self-conscious about having to sleep well that I kind of panicked and didn't. But it's material palette. I mean, that's obviously something that's a big factor in the designing of any space. Is there any evidence out there that certain materials facilitate a sense of well-being over others? I mean, the assumption perhaps is natural materials, what we might call noble materials, those that come with a certain tactility might inspire that sense more than an artificial hard surface, shiny surface, those kind of things. I don't know. Do you have any proof or evidence of that kind of thinking?
That extreme example then of the natural material that is living and breathing, or at least is kind of like evolving, is purer and cleaner than something that's got loads of kind of chemicals in it as well. And that's a little bit to my earlier point about kind of value and people understanding, is that wasn't understood a few years ago, that it was that was so clear that it was bad for your well-being to be in a particular environment with no air exchange, with poor quality paints, surrounded by petrochemicals. So I think there's an obvious one in it being the more natural and the more pure, and the way it can age kind of gracefully is better. So that's the kind of the big picture. And when it's color palettes, again, that's something that can be easily managed with wellness.
Yeah, for me, I think when it comes to materials, the way that we interact with spaces, and especially the tactile sense, is really multifaceted. So obviously you have the look of something, and the look of something has various perceptual aspects and the context in which it's in. So for example, a wood or a hard surface has more of a serious tone. If you have soft furnishings, we associate it with a sense of warmth, calmness, a sense of kind of dropping into your body when you see it. Then you have, for example, the actual touch aspect of it, and soon you have materials that are soft and for fuzzy, anything that invites you to want to touch it, I think is really interesting, because it invites you to slow down and perhaps interact with the space, and also the way that your behavior moves through the space changes because you might stop and look or touch and these sorts of different things. I think that also when it comes to the natural fabrics, there is generally a sense of, anything to do with the noble materials. I've never heard that before. I'm definitely going to use it again. I love it. And biomimicry and all that sort of stuff. When you have these living and breathing organisms or things made from wood and natural finishes, you end up having a deeper connection to nature and a reverence for it in a way. So it's also this idea of how do these materials that we use shift the behavior that we take, and how can the materials that we choose to use influence, for example, how do we care for the planet? How do we build a deeper connection through these materials? And I just think that amazing things you can do with some of these fabrics and woods and mycelium is like awe-inspiring to think about what they do and how those things can help us show up differently about how we care for the world as well, not only for ourselves, which obviously has a knock-on effect, of course.
We've got a really in-depth toolkit of using biophilic design in our practice as well, and we don't necessarily explain it to the client like that, but we're bringing in not only the materiality but things like form as well. So there's about symmetry, purity, kind of order is making people feel more relaxed, whereas the opposite of being a chaotic, angular, complex space, you're not being able to relax.
There's loads of science around that, so you're doing it all right already.
Yeah.
Also, I suppose you touched on the sustainability of the materials. I think if we are living and working in spaces that we understand are healthy for not just ourselves but also our planet, we tend to feel better in those spaces. We're happy we're in there, rather than being surrounded by plastic and what did you say, petrol paints. Yes.
Those are not the only things to consider, though. I mean, we're talking about the tactile elements, maybe the aesthetic elements, but there's also light, sound, smell. Light, for me, is a particular trigger. It is. I mean, the scourge of the LED, don't even get me started on that. There's so much terrible lighting out there. It's extraordinary. That kind of stark white light is enough to give you a headache. And I think there is even evidence now that LEDs are giving us headaches and maybe affecting our productivity. Why do we so often get that wrong? You're a designer, Simon. Why do we screw up the lighting so frequently?
I mean, there's this kind of analogy that if you just take half the lights out of any space, it'll look twice as good straight away.
Yes.
That can be a very cheap refurbishment solution.
Yeah.
That one. But I was at a restaurant recently where there'd been a fault in the system, and all the lights were on full power. So it was in like cleaner mode, they call that. But someone had booked the restaurant for a party of 10. It was really difficult. It was in Barcelona, a big event. It couldn't get anywhere else. And no one really enjoyed themselves. The food could have been delicious, but it was just horrible. You're like, oh my God, like this, like the conversation was awkward. So it's really, really, really important, the lighting. And that is done with not only the color temperature and the quality of the light, but also the level of the lighting as well. So even it just being a warm light on a table is better than kind of spotlights.
Although we've probably all been in a restaurant situation where you can barely see your food because it's so dim, but maybe there's a sweet spot somewhere. I've noticed this really recently. I don't know if it's just come about through me aging somewhat, but the acoustics in restaurants is really, really bad, to the point that I can't hear the person sitting next to me, and I go home with a sore throat because I'm yelling. Why do you think so little consideration is given to that area?
In Simon's practice, it sounds like you're really doing this already, so I really commend that. I think that people don't think about the multisensory space enough at the outset of the design. Ultimately, we design for the visual sense most prominently, and as a species, we are visually dominant. It's said that 80% of our sensory hierarchy is made up of vision, for example. But obviously, everything is interacting in that one moment to shape your experience of it. The lighting, I just moved into a new flat, and like I was like, I have to change these LED pot lights, and I immediately had to change it. It just happened last weekend, and I'm like, whew, I can breathe and relax a little bit. But the acoustics of a space are so important, and I wish that more spaces from the kind of ground up were built with the acoustics in mind. I think that too often you design for one sense and then you bring in the second one, and at that point it's too late. You need the acoustician and these kind of archaeoacoustic specialists, of which there's so many now more kind of coming out in the world, and there's loads of amazing research happening at Greenwich University around this, about the way that all these things interact and how to design the spaces so we can avoid us having headaches, not being able to hear each other in these environments in these various different ways. And I think that with a lot of the sound technologies that are being developed as well, you have the opportunity to do this. But also some of the things can be small, right? Paneling the walls, having certain like water features to do sound masking and these sorts of elements. I think that these are also things that we can think about within city spaces as well. And so I think for me, it's about getting everybody together at the table at the beginning, because then people can call attention to things that might not work then. And sometimes once you get too far, it's too late. And then the budget runs out. And then everyone's just left with it.
I think also on all these aspects, air, light, sound, I think also a temperature is a big one. We need to be creating spaces that are flexible and adjustable. So people with different needs, from diverse backgrounds, from people who are neurodiverse, can also like feel comfortable in them. So I think we need to consider that. I can, just from experience working in offices and going to different clients' offices, as a woman, I always feel cold in an office because the temperature is always set for optimum men's temperature, and women tend to be colder generally. So yeah, it's just having that flexibility and allowing for different parts of the office to be lit differently acoustically, because sometimes we need the stimuli to feel energized, to have a very exciting collaboration or conversation.
You said you've been doing this now for about a year. When you're talking to, in your case, architects and designers in their workplace, what are some of the top things that are being listed as affecting well-being negatively for them?
I'm not sure if it's for necessarily the environment, because as designers, we tend to work in beautiful, amazing spaces we've designed for ourselves. But I think it's more around the culture of work. An RIBA study, which was actually published this year, found that 90% of designers and architects do overtime, and 40% work 50 or more hours. A few of the reasons they listed there was poor client management. So it's stuff that we can truly like educate on. Another thing that was listed was fee structures. How do we structure our fees? We want to be competitive, so as designers we want to get the project, but not necessarily at the expense of our employees, because it's really important to support them through that. So these are some of the aspects we see in all the practices we work with.
Okay, so no complaints on the space that they're in.
No, the spaces,
okay.
no.
So we've got various things crossing over in this talk, but that's very interesting to hear. I was going to, we've been bouncing between various environments. We've been principally looking at workplaces, hospitality, public spaces more broadly, but then of course there's also the home. Wellness at home versus in the workplace versus in a hotel, in a healthcare environment. They all have very different demands, but would you say there are any universal design principles that we can apply across all of these domains?
Scientifically speaking, I can give a little bit of insight that there's like an age-old question in aesthetic science that says, are our aesthetic preferences universal or are they individual? And the answer, of course, is, well, it depends. And there are some universal truths that exist to a degree. Curvature, I think you mentioned. We prefer curved environments. There's loads of studies that show that they encourage more approach-oriented tendencies. People feel more at ease to move around, be themselves, promote psychological safety, as opposed to closing off their body and having a fear-based response to things. We like symmetry. Ultimately, we like, of light streaming in, these sorts of things. But I think what's really important is there is a sense of individuality. Our preferences and our responses are shaped by the cultures in which we came from, from, what we grew up with, what we've been taught, what we've been exposed to, our memories from those situations. And the celebration of diversity is a very interesting thing, not just neurodiversity, but cultural diversity, perceptual diversity. We all experience colors differently. And of course, this doesn't make it any easier to design for universal experiences within the workplace and those sorts of things. It's about people understanding how they feel in different environments. When you are creating a workplace, for example, have different rooms and sections that have different kind of design aesthetics that people can gravitate towards certain spaces, and then see that I prefer these colors, I prefer these fabrics, or maybe some people like more ergonomic settings where they sit upright with their chair, as opposed to what I do a lot of the time and slouch down into my sofa when I do work, which is probably not very healthy for my back. But I think that, again, especially in the home, it's about understanding what makes your space unique to you and how do you want to feel. Do you want to feel relaxed, grounded, down to earth? Do you want to feel energized? Do you want to feel calm? Do you want a sense of expanse and those sorts of things? We're doing work with Muto at the moment, the furniture brand and the furniture company, and they've done a lot of work on aesthetics to date, and they work with everything from the workplace to hospitality and the home, and thinking about how to help everybody understand a little bit more about how their furniture can help shape these spaces to help people feel a certain way.
Yeah, it is a massive question, and the answer of applying good principles of design to any typology is part of the answer there. But then you get into the specifics of that space. So a hospital does have different functions, and someone needs to feel more comfortable than they are in the bar in the hotel. So if you can dig into the detail of how you can make someone feel more comfortable, more well in those areas. But there are certain consistent tricks that you're mentioning there as well, is about people feeling that they are in a sense of community, but within a busy space. So if you were in the hospital waiting room, or if you were in the lobby of a hotel, if I'm in a defensible space where I can be kind of that it's an active space, but you still feel that you're comfortable and private. That's happening a lot in the workplace. It's not just kind of, everything's ordered and the same. Is you can break away, and this idea of being private but in a public space is a trend, and it probably was happening in certain typologies before the workplace, but now we're explicitly bringing it in by allowing you earlier you talked about acoustics. If it's an acoustically comfortable space, I'm not annoying everybody else. I feel like I'm in my space and I can control my lighting temperature as well. You're going to dwell for longer.
You absolutely need the variety within the workplace or anywhere else to allow for as many people to feel as comfortable as possible.
I think when it comes to the workplace as well, we want to encourage people to go to work, at least a few days a week, right? Because if we all spend too much time in our homes, we end up being alone, and we're on the digital screens. So creating a workplace environment, like you just mentioned, where I don't need to be around you all the time, but I know that you're there. When I walk and I get a coffee, you will be there, someone to speak to, helping to fight things like loneliness, and also fostering a sense of collaboration and just kind of analog structures and not so many digital structures. So the more we can create an invitation to want to be there, as you mentioned, to go back and visit and dwell, is so important.
I mean, if we need any reminder of the power of design in making us feel better, we can also look at examples of the power of design making us feel worse, and sort of purposefully so. I think of airports or high traffic areas where you're being sort of purposefully channeled and slightly stressed in the process through restriction of space, through the materials used, through the lighting used. I mean, you could go to the extreme of prisons, those kind of environments that are made to feel hostile and stressy. So if we remind ourselves of that, I think it's also it's a great way to remind ourselves of just how much design can make a difference to all of these aspects of our life, and long may that continue, dear designers. Keep up the really great work. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank Robin, Sunny, and Simon for speaking today, and thank you all for coming.